Comperu 3. 3. As 23. 40. At times assisted by woman attendants, she put on breastbands and a white robe, often richly embroidered, according to her financial status. Ch 2. 32. Re 19. 7, 8. PS 45. 13, 14 She decked herself with ornaments and jewels, if she was able to do so. ISA 49. 18. 61. 10. Re 21. 2, and then covered herself with a light garment, a form of veil, that extended from head to foot. ISA 3. 19, 23 This explains why Laban could so easily practice a deception on Jacob so that Jacob did not know that Laban was giving him Leah instead of Rachel. GE 29. 23, 25 Rebekah put on a head covering when she approached to meet Isaac. GE 24. 65 This symbolized the subjection of the bride to the bridegroom, to his authority. 1 Co 11. 5, 10. The bridegroom was likewise arrayed in his best attire and often had a handsome headdress and a garland on his head. Ca 3. 11. ISA 61. 10 Escorted by his friends, he would leave his house in the evening for the home of the bride's parents. Mount 9. 15 From there the procession, accompanied by musicians and singers, and usually by persons bearing lambs, moved toward the home of the bridegroom or to the house of his father. The people along the route would take great interest in the procession. The voices of the bride and bridegroom would be heard in exultation. Some, particularly maidens bearing lambs, would join the procession. J 7. 34. 16. 9. ISA 62. 5. Mount 25. When the bridegroom might spend considerable time at his home and, then again, some delay might take place before the procession would leave the home of the bride, so that it would thus be quite late, and some who were waiting along the way might get drowsy and fall asleep, as in Jesus' illustration of the 10 virgins. The singing and the exultation might be heard quite a distance ahead, those hearing it making the cry, "Here is the bridegroom." The attendants were ready to greet the bridegroom when he came, and those invited to the marriage supper would enter the house. After the bridegroom and his entourage had gone into the house and closed the door, it was too late for tardy guests to enter. Mount 25. 1-12. 22. 1-3. GE 29. 22 It was looked upon as a gross insult to decline the invitation to the marriage feast. Mount 22. The guests might be provided with robes. Mount 22. 11, and their respective places at the feast were often designated by the one extending the invitation. Lu 14. 8-10. Friend of the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom had a large share in the arrangements, and was looked upon as bringing together the bride and groom. The friend of Otextoi Acute Muritra Longo, marriage 342 evidently also belonged to the man when he was engaged to a woman. New 30. 3-8, 10-15 The husband was the lord, master of the household, and was considered the owner heb. Bal of the woman. De 22. 22. Proverbs 31 describes some of the duties of the wife toward her husband, or owner, which included the household work, the making of and care for clothing, even some of the buying and selling, and general supervision of the household. The woman, while being in subjection and being in a sense the property of the husband, enjoyed a fine status and many privileges. Her husband was to love her, and this was true even if she was a secondary wife or one who has been taken as a captive. She was not to be mistreated and was guaranteed food, clothing, shelter, and the marriage due without diminution. Also, the husband could not constitute the son of the favorite wife as the firstborn at the expense of the son of the hated or less preferred wife. X 21. 7-11. De 21. 11, 14-17 Faithful Hebrew men loved their wives, and if the wife was wise and acted in harmony with God's law, often the husband would listen to her or approve of her actions. GE 21. 8-14. 27. 41-46. 28. 1-4. Even the unengaged virgin who was seduced by an unmarried man was protected, for if the father permitted, the seducer had to marry the girl and could never divorce her all his life. 22. 28, 29 If the wife was formally accused by her husband of not being a virgin at the time of marriage and the charge was proved false, her husband was fined and could never divorce her. 22. 17-19 A woman who was accused of secret adultery, if innocent, was then to be made pregnant by her husband so that she could bear a child and thereby give public notice of her innocence. The dignity of the wife person was respected. Intercourse with her during menstruation was forbidden. Law 18. 19. New 5. 12-28. Prohibited marriages. Besides prohibition of marriage alliances with non-worshippers of Jehovah, especially with the 7 nations in the land of Canaan x 34. 14-16. 7. 1-4. Other marriages were prohibited within certain degrees of consanguinity or affinity. Law 18. 6-17. A high priest was prohibited from marrying a widow, a divorced or violated woman, or a prostitute. He was to marry only a virgin from his people. Law 21. 10, 13, 14 The other priests could not marry a prostitute or violated woman, nor a woman divorced from her husband. Law 21. 1, 7 According to Ezekiel 44. 22, they could marry a virgin of the house of Israel or a widow who happened to be the widow of a priest. If a daughter inherited property, she was not to marry out of her tribe. This prevented a hereditary possession from circulating from tribe to tribe. New 36. 8, 9. Divorce. At the institution of marriage by the Creator, he made no provision for divorce. A man was to stick to his wife, and they must become one flesh. Ge 2. 24 A man would therefore have one wife who was considered one flesh with him. It was only after man's fall and consequent imperfections and degradation that divorce entered in. In giving the law to Israel, God did not at that time choose to enforce the original standard, but he regulated divorce so that it would not bring dissolution of the family arrangement in Israel or work undue hardship. However, at God's due time his original standard was restored. Jesus stated the principle governing the Christian congregation: that fornication gr. Poor middle.ner is the only valid ground for divorce. He explained that God did not enforce this standard through Moses out of regard for the hard-heartedness of the Israelites. Mount 19. 3-9. Mr. 10. 1-11. In the Christian congregation, therefore, aside from death, which automatically breaks the marriage tie, the only other way it may be broken is on the ground of fornication, which causes the offending one to become one flesh with an illicit partner. It therefore textoi acute miritra longo, marriage 343 be a virgin at the time of their marriage. De 22. 13-19, 28, 29. After a divorce, if a woman married another man and this man later divorced her or died, the original husband could not marry her again. This worked to prevent any scheme to bring about a divorce from the second husband, or perhaps even his death, so the original couple might remarry. De 24. 1-4. Jehovah hated an unjust divorce, especially where a faithful worshipper of his was treacherously dealt with in order to arrange for another marriage to a pagan woman who was not a member of his chosen covenant people. Mount 2. 14-16. See divorce. Polygamy. Since God's original standard for mankind was for the husband and wife to become one flesh, polygamy was not intended, and it is prohibited in the Christian congregation. Overseers and ministerial servants, who are to set the example for the congregation, are to be men having not more than one living wife. 1-3. 2-12. 1. 5, 6 This is in harmony with what true marriage is used to picture, namely, the relationship of Jesus Christ and his congregation, the only wife possessed by Jesus. F5. 21-33. As was the case with divorce, polygamy, while not God's original arrangement, was tolerated until the time of the Christian congregation. Polygamy had a start not long after Adam's deflection. The first Bible mention of it is concerning a descendant of Cain, Lamech, of whom it says, he proceeded to take 2 wives for himself. Ge 4:19. Concerning some of the angels, the Bible mentions that before the flood, the sons of the true God went taking wives for themselves, namely, all whom they chose. Ge 6:2. Concubinage was practiced under patriarchal law and under the law covenant. A concubine had a legal status. Her position was not a matter of fornication or adultery. Under the law, if a man's firstborn son was the son of his concubine, this son would be the one to receive the firstborn's inheritance,